Your daughter, Alice, experienced a psychotic episode while traveling overseas. Can you just take us back to that moment when you received that distressing, message? And God, what was going through your mind?
So Alice in 2015 had scrimped and saved and finished her uni degree and decided to go travelling overseas.
Hello and welcome to Beyond Diagnosis, a podcast to raise your awareness, decisions, and voice for alternative practices so you can take back control of your health. I'm Rita De Michele, your host, a mindset and empowerment coach, and the founder of the Onus platform. Join me each week so you can create the health of your dreams. Have you or someone you love faced a mental health crisis and remained silent? The stigma around mental health silences those who need support. It's time to break the silence and open the conversation. Today, we'll hear from Sarah Martin, a theatre nurse, mental health advocate, carer, and author of Dear Psychosis, as she shares her journey with her daughter's mental health challenges. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Rita. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, it would be very difficult to have anyone or that you love have mental health challenges. It's something, you know, like I said, we don't talk about it enough. It's kind of swept under the carpet. Getting help would be a challenge.
Uh, it seems like it's the rite of passage for a lot of our kids, whether they travel within their own country or travel overseas. And Alice had decided to go. So off she went, and we'd had discussions about being sensible, and talked about drugs, talked about alcohol, talked about meeting other people. So we'd covered every base, I thought. And of course, on this one Saturday, I happened to be at a nursing conference called Wellness for Life when I received a message from a stranger. And it said something like, "Hi, Sarah, I'm a friend of your daughter's. I think that she's having some sort of mental health crisis." The immediate panic I felt. And then I thought, well, is this a scam? Like, she's in Istanbul. Is this true? And there was a bit of backwards and forwards from him. And my husband was playing golf. He was uncontactable. So I was fortunate that I was able to then ring my son. And between us, then we were able to speak a little bit with Alice, a little bit more with this man. And then this was over the course of about 8 hours that day. And Alice was very ethereal in her talking. And so it was hard to know whether she there was something going on or not. But we realized that we had to do something. So within 24 hours, my son and I were on a plane to Turkey to find her and to see what had happened. By the time we got to Turkey, the previous 24 hours when we'd been able to talk to Alice, she had been very quiet in her speaking, but we'd been able to have a conversation. By the time we got to Istanbul, and this beautiful man had brought her to the airport, he was a Syrian refugee, absolutely amazing man. She couldn't speak. She mumbled. The daughter that was at the airport wasn't the daughter that I would say I sent to the airport 3 or 4 months prior to. She was wearing a scarf, something wrapped around her head with tufts of hair coming out. She had a dress on, and over that a skirt, and very, very, not, I wouldn't say unkempt, but her dress was not in a fashion that you would see people walking around with. And she couldn't talk. She mumbled.
How scary.
So my heart started beating. We then realised that this beautiful man that Alice had been having a holiday romance with had saved her life. If he hadn't have contacted us, we would never have found her in Istanbul. We were very aware what would have happened. Where I'm a nurse, my son's in his last year of medicine, we realised that, well, we think that she's psychotic. We're not trained with that. So we think, well, she's suffering from a psychosis. And within 3 days, we arrived on a Monday in Turkey. On the Wednesday, we were back on a plane with Alice to bring her home. What she'd had was a drug-induced psychosis that had been caused by a drug called Captagon. And this drug had been used by the Syrian and ISIS fighters to stay awake for days and days. And about a week prior to us getting there, Alice had gone to a nightclub with all her mates, and one of the acquaintances had offered her a drug, and this was the drug. And she'd been informed that it would be like having some energy drinks, and she thought, why not? And so she took it, not realising that the consequences could be as far-reaching as they went. Do we condone this? No, we don't. But we realised when we got her home that we needed to deal with the now, and the now was that she was then diagnosed with psychosis. The cause unknown, the doctors did mention it could be from further mental health concerns, which would be bipolar, schizophrenia, and any unknown or known mental health diagnosis. But a diagnosis with all mental health doesn't take days, hours. It takes weeks and months and sometimes years. And in Alice's case, the diagnosis of bipolar happened 2 years later when she had another psychosis caused by stress. That bipolar affective disorder was then diagnosed.
So when you say bipolar, schizophrenia and everything, was she predisposed to those conditions and the psychosis brought it out, or did the psychosis bring out those conditions?
So the bipolar was the cause. The trigger was the drug. So when people say, did you ever know? No, I'd never realised that there was any mental health concerns with Alice. But we don't have shoulda, woulda, couldas in our house anymore. We had hindsight, insight and foresight. So we look back. So we looked back, and I would say when Alice was growing up, probably 15, 16, 17, I'd say, gee, the hormones are strong in Alice, not realising I have one daughter and 2 sons. So I just thought, gee, the hormones are strong. Her reaction to some things were stronger than some, but I wouldn't have put any dots together. But with hindsight, I look back and I go, definitely there were signs, but any stronger signs, I lifted up that carpet and swept them under and didn't listen to my intuition, which may have told me, but you can't second guess yourself. When something like this happens, I think you deal with the now. You don't deal with the shoulda, woulda, couldas.
Yeah.
We really push them to the side.
Well, it's unhelpful, isn't it? It
really is unhelpful.
It doesn't value add to what you're experiencing in the moment. All it does is pile on more guilt and shame and everything else onto yourself that you didn't, do it correctly back then.
Correct.
For our listeners, in case they have anybody in their family who they feel might be experiencing this, can you just talk to us a little bit about what are the symptoms and signs that you saw in Alice that said that psychosis, and what are the signs and symptoms that she experiences now with bipolar and psychosis? So just so they can start recognizing.
So when we arrived, I've never seen any signs of psychosis with Alice before. So it was 2015 when we arrived in Istanbul. That was the sign. She thought she had a microchip implanted in her. The television was listening to her. So reality is gone. Alice didn't just have one voice talking to her, she had hundreds of voices talking to her. So day-to-day reality was non-existent for her. You can have delusions, so she could see things that weren't there, hear things that weren't there. Well, we couldn't hear them. And with symptoms of bipolar, Alice prefers to call it manic depression, which is the old saying. And it is, people have very high highs and low lows. So it's depression, and the mania is, people often associate it with cleaning rooms, being really tidy. I've only ever seen Alice manic once, and her room, she did clean it up. It was very clean, but Alice didn't have that. That was once, and that was when she was diagnosed. So I, I think it's very hard, and I think that's why with psychiatry it can take years and months and days. I've gone backwards then, but signs aren't obvious, and which is why with mental health concerns it can be frustrating for carers and for those living with mental health concerns that there is no diagnosis, that they don't have a diagnosis yet, and it needs patience. So having patience, you can't assume that your daughter or son or loved one does have schizophrenia or anxiety or depression or bipolar. It needs a diagnosis, and that's what takes a long time.
Yes, I know that is an area within healthcare that is incredibly frustrating, hard to diagnose because everyone presents differently. I assume they would, and it's hard on the doctors, it's hard on the family. Does she live with this psychosis daily, or is that something that comes in and out?
So the psychosis, she has been through twice and hospitalized twice and is now on medication. She's on antipsychotic medication and a mood stabilizer, and that keeps her well. And she's now diagnosed bipolar. So, and she lives with that. So that's a complex mental health, and that's what she will forever live with. It is a chronic illness, just like kidney disease, heart disease, and she will live with it. We need to change the narrative, the mental health concerns, that it is a chronic illness and people just don't get over it. It's not going to be cured. Yes. She will live with it, so that you need to know the signs and symptoms of triggers. With Alice, it is definitely stress, lack of sleep, and taking medication, speaking to a therapist, whether that be a counsellor, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, putting things in place that will help you, making family aware, and work colleagues and friends aware of your stresses, of what can be a catalyst, and staying well and talking. I think that is the most important thing. If you're not feeling well, let people know before it actually gets to an incident. Maybe it's, I've forgotten to take my medication, or I ran out of my medication and I've been too busy to go to the chemist or pharmacy to get more. Or it's by a stress happening at work, a death, a breakup, all these stresses. And if people know the clues, then people can help and say, hey, are you okay? And we're very fortunate in that, being a nurse, we've always been very open and honest with discussion. Other than when Alice was first diagnosed with psychosis, we became very silent and it was very lonely. And it took us as a family probably 2 years then to start talking about Alice's mental health and us as a family. And I understand that completely, because often loved ones are so busy keeping their loved one with mental health concerns alive or in the best place possible, that you don't think of yourself. Your focus is purely on your loved one and getting them better or in the best place possible for them.
Yes, I would. And I believe you have other children. What is the impact like for people listening to this and they're navigating it who may not be aware of the impact on the entire family? What did you experience and what did your other children, how did it impact them?
So my oldest, he was in his final year of medicine and he was living in Melbourne doing his medical degree there. The one thing he said to me, which I thought was so mature, he was 24-year-old, telling me, "Mum, don't give up work. Don't make Alice's ill health your world. Have something outside that you need a focus outside, not just focusing on Alice's health." And that was very true. So for about 8 weeks in 2015, I didn't work. So I was her everything. My husband went to work, but I focused on Alice. And then I came back to work a day. So that was a day, 2 days a week. And that was really important that I did that. Our youngest son was 13 at the time. And we had a discussion around the table, and I told him, didn't go into the specifics, but he knew that Alice was suffering psychosis, and we told him what that meant and that she was in hospital. And we went through, I cried the day that I laminated a piece of paper that said phone numbers. So it was 000, it was mental health, it was Lifeline, there was mental health crisis line, there was the local hospital phone number to ring in a crisis, so that if he happened to come home and Alice was at home and not in a good space, what he had to do, and I wasn't there, what he had to do to make her safe or to make himself safe. And I did cry putting that up.
Oh, it would be.
And having that discussion with him. But he said after it, he goes, "Yep, I've got it, Mum. Going outside playing basketball with the kids." And he left. It was very matter of fact. We kept it short and simple and hoped that he had enough in his repertoire to be armed with what he needed to be. The disappointing thing was that I rang his school and I spoke to the year master in his year, and told him what was going on in the family, and if they had any concerns, I would, keep an eye on him at home, but if they could keep an eye on him at school, and if there was any concerns, which there wasn't, but I never heard back from them. And I should have been more on that and rung every school term. And I think that for listeners out there, if you do have children that are going to school and that there is a family member going through a mental health crisis at home, let school know, but be preemptive. Let them speak to them at the beginning of every term so that everybody's got their finger on the pulse.
Yes, what sage advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a shame the school didn't actually step up because I think that's
Disappointed, but I think I should have stepped up a bit more too. But it's what you know, and it's what you're armed with yourself. So always knowing good information is great.
and you don't know everything, you don't know what to do in the beginning, especially when it's new. It's
No
new
idea.
for everybody. It's not new just for the person who has the mental health challenge. It's new for everyone.
And often people will not talk about mental health when it comes to their loved one, because how can you out them? How can you say, my daughter has this or my son has this, without having a conversation with your loved one? Are you okay with me sharing this information? And if they're psychotic, they're not going to give you consent because they don't have it. But do you, if it's a safety issue, then you need to share that information without a doubt. But it's when they become well that you can then ask them, okay, in this situation, what can we have in place so that, we need to let work know, we need to let school know, we need to do this. So being armed with all the information possible is hard if you're not breaking that silence. And I understand completely that silence because we were silent. We did not open our mouths for 2 years.
Well, it is so difficult. You're trying to respect her
Mm.
and whilst you're looking after your own well-being.
Yes.
Because,
You're grieving over the unknown. You're grieving, will she work again? Will she go to school again? Will she be able to hold down a job? Will she ever leave home? So there's this grief until you work out how well that your loved one can get.
Does Alice work now?
So proud mama moment here. Alice has held a job since about 2016, so a year after. She did teaching English as a second language course. Then in 2020, of course, when the pandemic hit, there were no international students, so work stopped. And she said, hey, Mum, I really like to do psychology. So she did that online, did her honours degree last year, and this year she's doing her clinical masters of psychology so that she can then work in the hospital and treat patients like she was. Now, she will always have mental health concerns. She will always be on medication, but she is stable and she is well, and she is my hero. And we are blessed, and we think that she's the most wonderful girl in the world.
That's beautiful. Your acceptance is just gorgeous. Do you find that Alice experiences any discrimination in the
So
way?
I can't talk about Alice. What I can talk about is what I've felt when she first was diagnosed with psychosis. She lost a lot of friends, and I think that they were scared. And I think that when we started breaking our silence about Alice's mental health, there were people that I would start talking about mental health, and I could see them glaze over. And in the beginning, I was sort of a little bit angry, like, oh God, these are my friends I'm talking to. But then I realized it's just not in their sphere. It's not in their radar. And I needed to reset the anger that I felt with that it's not that they didn't care. They do care. It's just that it's not in their little, not little world, but it's not in their world. And the thing is, now I mention it, and if I see the glaze over, I stop and I think, I've mentioned it. And if they need to come talk to someone, they'll know, which is exactly what happens. Now, a lot of people will call me, friends. I'll get a lot of emails from people that have read my book, and I'm so appreciative of that will contact me if they think that I can give them some advice or reassurance or allay some fears that they have on their child or their partner.
Yes, yeah. I find that there are always certain subjects that you talk about with friends and or relatives that make them, I think it makes them feel so uncomfortable because they don't know what to say. I think cancer is one of them. And I think mental health issues or concerns is right up to the top, like as soon as like you were saying, they glaze over. But it's also that, I don't know if I'm correct in saying this, but as soon as you start saying it, they glaze over because they want to be emotionally away from it. You think they what to say.
Yes. And I think that they want to hear about it, but sometimes things are too close to home. Nobody knows what's happening behind closed doors of somebody else's house.
Yeah.
And I think that being armed with compassion and strength and knowledge and power is so important, and to be able to step back from being judgmental is so important.
Absolutely. I really got that, like from your book and from what we're saying in talking about today. You have been incredibly non-judgmental, considering this happened from taking a drug, and you had already spoken to her about not taking drugs, how to be careful. Like, so it would have been so easy to go down, what were you thinking? We spoke about this. How can you be so careless and all? But you didn't. You just were there for her.
Oh, Rita, we did. My husband and I definitely did. Like, we were definitely not perfect with each other. Like, we were, how this, oh my God. But then we actually made a call to say we needed to deal with the now, like I spoke about earlier.
Yes.
We needed to deal with the now, and we need to get her well. And it was probably about 4 months later that I had a conversation with Alice, and it went like this: Alice, if you do drugs again and become psychotic, I cannot do this again. I cannot go through with you being psychotic, hospitalized. What are your thoughts? And she went, Mum, I don't ever want to take drugs again. I never want to go to hospital again. And my intention is not to. And which was wonderful. In 2017, when she had her second psychosis, it was due to stress, and I'm 100% looking after her, but I'm not going to be behind another drug-induced psychosis. And it was a really open and raw and honest discussion. And I'm so glad we had it, because I think you need to set boundaries, and there's certain rights and wrongs, and people are fallible. We're not all perfect, and we all do things that we shouldn't have done, which she did. But she took that drug of her own accord, and she's paid the penalty and the price for it. And she and we move on. So that's we move on from that, and we move on in a positive way, and having open and honest discussions with our kids about drugs, about sex, about all sorts of different things is what we need to do. We need to have open and honest discussions.
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is so important. And I love the way you spoke to her about it, that you weren't going to accept it. And then you asked her, what did she think about it? So you weren't sort of commanding and demanding of her. It was an inclusive conversation,
Yeah, yeah.
which is, I'm sure, very helpful for people with mental health. I think from what you're saying, you would have to be careful how you word things with her.
Yes. And when Alice came home, to get her to the GP, then the public hospital, she thought all she needed was yoga and she'd be better. And I don't know how and why she listened to her, but again, being a nurse, we've always talked it out. So we did talk to her. She didn't want to go to hospital because she didn't think she needed it, but she did. And I think it's because we've always been open and honest. And I said to her, even though she was psychotic, I will always be open and truthful with you. You need to know that if you do not take the medication that they are going to give you, that then there are other methods that they will use, but you need to be in hospital. You need to do what the doctor says. And she listened to us. And I know that we were in a very fortunate place that she was able to listen to us, and she heard our voice. I know that there are others out there not so fortunate and in not such a good space. And that's where we need to listen to our mental health workers. And it can be hard because often there is no diagnosis, and medication is a trial and error situation. And frustration in capital letters. I hear you and I see you.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking about doctors, how did you find navigating the healthcare system, and who did you see for? I think you saw a few doctors.
Yeah, so this is a great question. And I have to tell you that the frustration in capital letters was definitely there. If I count the GP and then I go through all the people that we saw in the emergency department and counting the nurse, the registrar, an intern, then a mental health nurse, then the psychiatric registrar, I think we saw about 6 or 7 within a 3-hour space, 6 or 7 mental health care workers and healthcare workers in that time. And I was frustrated. We told the same story. We, Alice, Jessie and I, told the same story 6 or 7 times.
Wow.
And it wasn't until I was writing my book that I sent it to a friend of mine who's a doctor. And he came back to me and he said, Sarah, you need to think of it as that each healthcare worker is getting the facts straight from your mouth to their ears. And I liken it to, we have a game here in Australia called telephone. And it is where you have about 10 people in a line and you whisper into the first person's ear and you say, the cat sat on the mat, then ate its food. By the time it gets to that last person, it's the dog had fun at the park. It's completely different. So when he said that, and when I likened it to that telephones, I realised that seeing those 6 different healthcare professionals was okay because they got the facts straight from my mouth. They didn't get the fact from the very first nurse that we saw or the very first doctor. It was my mouth to their ears, my words to their ears. And it's so important with those capital letter frustration, we need to let that go and remember that we're saying the true story, the story that is the correct facts. So
Yes.
that was well worth it.
And do you find, for anybody listening to that is really interested in that part of it, do you find that a combination of people helped as opposed to, say, one? Like sometimes people go, you've got mental. I think that's one of the issues with mental health is that they have this misconception that straight away you're going to go to a psychiatrist, you could be put in hospital, straight away you're going to be on medication, but that's not always the case. Like, did you find that a combination of people or professionals helped, or was there one that stood out?
Oh, definitely you need a team of healthcare professionals around you, but you also may need social workers, you need counsellors, you might need a psychologist, a psychiatrist. The nurses, the mental health nurses are amazing. And in conjunction with that, they will get a plan together that will promote the best possible outcome for you. You do need a team of healthcare professionals that are going to talk about you within the health setting so that everything is private and confidential. And that's the most important thing. With mental health, as I say, we don't want our mental health blabbed across, social media unless we are behind it. It's so important that we trust in a healthcare team, and I know that I keep talking about the frustration. We have brought it up. It is frustrating when there is no diagnosis or when the medication is not correct, or you think that you don't need to be on medication, and that's when we do need to trust those around us.
Yes, yeah.
And sometimes listening to your loved one or other friends, and sometimes friends have all this well-meaning
Advice.
that worked for them. What works for us may not work for you. It's not one size fits all in mental health, as in any other diagnosis. It's definitely not. And I'm positive and upbeat today because of what I've gone through in the last 10 years. And there are times when I am sad and I am depressed, and I do speak to a psychologist. I used to speak to them monthly, but now I speak to them every 3 months, and it is amazing. And I thought, what am I going to speak to them about for, an hour? But I did. And it might not be all about Alice. It might be about my sons or my husband or my work, what's happening at work. And I do feel lighter having spoken about it. So if you are a carer or a loved one, speaking to someone for us is, gee, I really, really have appreciated it.
It's important. It's part of the self-care and self-preservation as you're going through this.
That's it.
Yes.
Do stuff for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us what are just a couple of the misconceptions that you'd like to, bust around mental health?
So if I can show you the cover of the book, I'd really like to just.
I love the cover.
So this is Alice, that she sent a picture of her face after she'd drawn over it in Istanbul. And now this is just but one face of mental health. I think that mental health we often see on the television with somebody psychotic wielding a knife or a gun and the police there trying to dispel the person or trying to disarm them. That is but one face of mental health. Not all mental health looks like a person with a knife or a gun. Doesn't always look with someone with drawing all over their face. Sometimes mental health looks like you and me.
Yes.
Not all mental health has an arrow walking down it in the street. So it's really important that, like, on days where they say it's a "Are you okay" day, every day, as far as I'm concerned, is "Are you okay" day. That if somebody says they're not in a good space, listen to them. And if you don't know what to do next, suggest that perhaps it's a good time to speak to someone. And going to speak to a GP is really awesome if they are not in a good space. Ask the questions, ask them how they are, ask them if they are thinking of suicide. Suicide is not a scary word, and it's not going to make someone attempt suicide. And in fact, talking about it is often a lot of relief for the person that you are asking the questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. That's
Absolutely love that.
yeah.
So lastly for today, what tips do you have for parents, carers, friends, loved ones of those with mental health concerns?
Okay, so my biggest tip would be routine. With Alice, when she was home from hospital, she was sleepy. Okay, so we need to get out of bed. What time is the best time for her to get out of bed in the morning? Might be 9 o'clock, might be 10 o'clock, might be whatever suits you. But let's say 9 o'clock, I go in, I say, "Out of bed, Alice." Might take me another attempt to get out of bed. Okay, so then I open the curtains and say, "It's time to get out of bed." With it, then a shower. Maybe it's not a shower. Maybe it's come down and have breakfast. Then maybe it's get out of pajamas. And then when they're a little better, it might be, okay, out of bed, out of pajamas, into the shower, breakfast, one chore. And that chore might be getting out of bed, getting out of pajamas. Or that chore might be putting dishes in the dishwasher or unstacking the dishwasher, putting clothes on the line. Just one chore, because everybody needs to be needed, and feeling important is so important. And often we forget, we try and protect our loved ones. No, let's get them to do things, feel important. Hey, I really need some help with this. Can you do this for me? So feeling important is amazing. Now I've got them, and ask them how they're feeling. How are you going today? Maybe it's not exactly those words, because it can be really frustrating. Someone saying to you, "How are you? How are you going? You're feeling depressed, or you're anxious." There might be other words that you can use. When Alice was first psychotic, she couldn't concentrate for more than 5 minutes. Perhaps reading them a book, reading them a poem, reading them a letter, reading them something, because there is no book reading for them. There's no television. Their focus is non-existent.
Well, it sounds like purpose and connection are so important there.
They're great words.
Yes. Sarah, it has been amazing listening to your story, and fantastic that you've written this book to empower so many other people who are experiencing a mental health challenge, maybe within themselves or a family member. And for everybody, if you've resonated with this, please go to the show notes. That's where you can connect with Sarah, and a link to her book will be there. Do purchase it. It's a fantastic read. I appreciate you so much coming on.
Thanks for having me, Rita.
I would love to know, what was the biggest insight or aha moment you got from this interview, so you can now speak up, take action, and make informed decisions for your health. And if you like this episode, get instant access to your free ebook, Alternative Wisdom, Taking Back Control of Your Health, at life-onus.com.